It's not stopped before, in other words. So we're extremely happy to have Haraoka-san, who has had a distinguished career in METI and at the OECD, and who is now the Executive Managing Director of Japan Economic Forum, and also is the Editor-in-Chief of Japan Spotlight. I don't know if you have an example of the magazine, or if not, we'll show it afterwards on the web. I encourage you to read it. So thank you very much, sir, for taking the time to join us. Here it is. We can put the mic like this, I think. Or our open views.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction. I'm very happy. I'm very much honored to be able to talk with you here at the Temple University. And today's subject to FDI in Japan, its role in the economy and its future, is one of my favorite subjects because I used to work for JETRO San Francisco, and I've been engaged in working for encouraging Silicon Valley investment or Silicon Valley IT companies to invest in Japan. First of all, I would like to introduce you to tonight's agenda, which consists of 5, as you can see. But I would like to change slightly the order of the topics. Firstly, I'm going to briefly survey FDI in Japan, in terms of statistics. And then I would like you to take note that after 1990s in particular, as you may know, we are getting into a so-called lost decades. And exactly in those moments, there are increasing need on Japan's side to attract foreign direct investment. And I would like to explain about the backgrounds, why we need foreign direct investment in Japan, with number 3 and number 4. First, risk of aging and depopularization. I'm sorry about misspelling, that should be depopularization. And number 4, FDI and innovation. And then I'm going to speak a little bit about the latest situation in number 2, risk of hollowing out of Japanese economy. And then finally, I'm going to present you measures taken by Japanese firms as well as governments to promote FDI. That is the order of my presentation. First of all, statistical survey. You can see in chart 2 in particular, inward direct investment in major countries. Among those developed nations, Japanese inward direct investment level is so low. That is 3.7%. But from 2000, it has been steadily increasing. But unfortunately, it has peaked in 2009 as it started declining in 2010. And I'm going to talk about the latest situation later. Looking at this graph, that reminds me of the Temple University lecture series last week. That was about social withdrawal, hikikomori. I'm not quite sure that social withdrawal is right translation or not, but hikikomori does seem to be one of the most common features describing the youth here in Japan. But according to my friend, journalist, American journalist, having spent many years in Japan. Japan, not only the youth, not only the young people, but also the country itself does seem to be getting into a sort of hikomori, social withdrawal. And one of the reasons why he is saying so is this chart, is this low level of inward direct investment. Japanese trade is now open. We import lots of things, and Japanese outward direct investment is reaching almost maturity point, and it's not so different from the other countries, the other developed nations. However, inward direct investment, the level of inward direct investment is still very low. Sorry, I'm going to skip the graph because my presentation time is limited. So just a minute. Yes. This is a graph on the aged population to the total. And this is the changes of the percentage of the aged population to the total in the developed countries. I'm going to talk about the backgrounds, why we need FDI in Japan so badly. Since 1990, as you know, as I said at the beginning, since 1990s, we got into a so-called lost decade. Japanese economy has been stagnant, and we need a stimulus to the economy badly. However, the economic growth rate is still low, and deflation, what we call deflation, continues for a long time. One of the reasons why we have such a stagnant economic situation is aging. The aged population means the population after 65 is drastically increasing in Japan compared with the other countries, France, UK, Germany, Italy. And this means productive population, the percentage of productive population is declining. That will affect our productivity. This table is recently published forecast of Japanese population by National Research Institute of Social Welfare and Population Issues. According to this forecast, as you see in the total population, it will decline. It will continue to decline, and in 2060, it's very shocking to see such a low figure. It's 86.74 for 740,000. So that is very, very small. It's declining. The population is declining and reaching such a figure. And that is, of course, the fewer children, decreasing number of the children is going on in Japan together with the progress of aging. And finally, aged population, the percentage of aged population above 65 years is going to reach almost 40% in 2060, as you can see from this table. Sorry. That is those from this chart and table. You can see the aging is certainly having a serious impact upon Japanese economic growth. And the second point, the second factor, which is a background that we need definitely FDI coming from overseas is another graph. Is shown in another graph. That is a little bit difficult to understand, but for the economists, it's very familiar concept. That is total factor productivity. Total factor productivity means that means contribution of technology to the economic growth. Economic growth can be divided into the three parts. So one is TFP, technology contribution, and the secondly capital input, and thirdly labor input. Labor input contribution is declining in Japan. If you compare two graphs, the part of labor input is negative in the graph right-hand side during 1995 to 2005 because of the depopularization. And also it's to be noted that TFP contribution is also getting smaller in 1995 to 2005 compared with 1980 to 1995. That's clearly seen from these graphs. And in the case of the USA, you see labor input contribution is relatively large. And also TFP, total factor productivity contribution, is getting larger in the recent years. So that means Japanese are getting behind Americans in terms of innovation. We need to encourage innovation to improve our economic performance. In particular, after depopularization and the aging has become so significant. Yes. One of the reasons why we need FDI to support technology contribution to the economic growth is FDI is bringing us highly skilled workers. From this graph, you see Japanese inward direct investment level is so low, and also proportion of foreigners among highly skilled workers is also very low. It's this 1.1% in both both factors has made a significant contrast with the other countries, US, UK, Germany, France, Canada, Australia. So I think in order to stimulate innovation, we need FDI. We need more foreign highly skilled workers stimulating innovation inside Japan. Perhaps in the 1970s or in the 1960s, when Japan enjoyed high economic growth, we didn't have to be so creative because we were lots of front runners in terms of innovation, and I think we can get the benefits from following those front runners in the innovation. However, today, Japanese economy reached a stage of maturity. We lost front runners whom we can follow. That means we have to be very creative. We have to create the new industries, new technologies. However, in the light of this, we need diversity, cultural diversity. Homogeneity, perhaps, which can be considered one of the most distinguished characters of Japanese society and economy, could be strengths to working as a factor encouraging economic growth in 1960s and 70s, because we don't need to be so creative. But once we got a situation where we need to have more originality in achieving economic growth, cultural diversity, heterogeneity should be better to encourage economic growth. But Japan is still behind the other countries in terms of that. Those are the two backgrounds where we got to meet FDI badly during the 1990s and also 2000s. However, as you know, earthquake happened last year, but even before the earthquake happened, what happened was not so good for FDI in Japan. That's what I would like to show you. Yes. The number of firms, first of all, we saw this graph, chart 1. From 2009 to 2010, FDI in Japan is shrinking slightly. And that is reflected upon table 1. The number of the firms with declining shareholding by foreign companies is increasing dramatically in terms of world total and also in terms of all the industries. The rate of increase over the previous year was 31.2% in 2009. On the other hand, as this table shows us, business activity of Japanese overseas subsidiaries in 2011 showed us a significant change. In particular, after the earthquake. The earthquake and Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power crisis took place on March 11th. And if you look at the DI stands for diffusion index. In July to September, it's increasing dramatically. For example, sales, business activity, business sales of Japanese overseas subsidiaries in terms of DI increased from 15.5 to 23.7. And also investment, 10.3 from 10.3 to 17.7, and employees from 88.5 to 12.7. This means, this DI increase means Japanese subsidiaries are very keen on strengthening their capacity, their production capacity overseas. So that means Japanese companies are starting to move their production bases from Japan to overseas. So that is another sign of, following out. of Japanese industries. You know, the internal FDI continues to be low, and even some foreign firms may be a little bit scared by nuclear power situation, starting to maybe even before a nuclear power situation, they start to get out of Japan. Besides that, Japanese subsidiaries are increasing their production capacity. That means Japanese companies are now starting to think about going overseas. So in this light, at the current situation, I would say FDI is you know, almost very crucial factor to save Japanese economy. I'm going to maybe say clearly about this, more clearly about this in my concluding remarks. And lastly, I'm going to talk about the measures to promote FDI made by Japanese firms as well as Japanese governments. So you see, yes, this chart 9, you can clearly see Japanese companies are now very positive, very active about hiring foreign students. Compared with 2010, 2011, the answer, you know, they will hire is 21.7%. It's clearly increasing. And objectives in hiring foreign students. Most companies answer that it is to acquire excellent personnel. So that means they really you know, would like to get competent foreign students, who would be very invaluable in promoting their innovation. Panasonic is a typical case, which is trying to increase number of foreign employees, and that's actually increasing dramatically, as these graphs show us. On the government side, JETRO always working very hard to promote FDI in Japan. This IDSC is an excellent organization where you can enjoy freelance space for about 6 months or something like that when you start business here in Japan. Further specific measures to promote setting up Asian headquarters in Japan. This is a special program. Unfortunately, due to political confusion in Japan, this law has not been passed yet by the parliament, though nobody objects to this idea. So I think that will be passed by parliament very soon. Anyway, preferential treatment of corporate tax and income tax, and simplification of legal procedure to set up offices in Japan. With those measures, the government would like to attract the companies, whatever the nationality may be, interested in having Asian headquarters in Japan. And also subsidy program for FDI with a greater impact upon the local economy, such as Tohoku area seriously hit by the earthquake, is included in this law. And also, perhaps most importantly, the improving business environment for FDI in Japan is necessary, such as English translation of the administrative guidelines, and also foundation of more international schools for non-Japanese children. Those are perhaps the measures to be appreciated by non-Japanese families. I guess in order to increase FDI in Japan, perhaps together with those short-term policies, we need a more longer-term perspective, and that is attracting foreign students. And foreign students coming to Japan is increasing, like this graph shows, in particular Chinese students. We need to encourage this trend, and perhaps I proposed in our magazine Japan Spotlight that we should start so-called Erasmus Program. Erasmus Program is created by European Union, if my memory is correct, and the students, European students, can study anywhere in Europe, and they got degrees from they can get degree wherever they spend student days in Europe, something like that. So that means intercultural exchange amongst students. For example, in the case of Asia, Chinese and Japanese students should be should exchange degrees more often, something like that. And that sort of long-term policies could lead to increase of FDI in Japan in the long run. Conclusion, I'm going to repeat, until the 1980s, FDI had contributed very little to Japan's economic growth. The strength of Japanese economy came from its homogeneity in the expanding global market. But from 1990s until March 11, 2011, FDI has been considered invariable to Japan's economic growth. Since the growth pattern depending upon the homogeneity came to an end, it was agreed upon that the diversity would encourage innovation and complement the population growth. Now, FDI is considered to be a key for Japan to survive in the world under an increasing risk of industrial hollowing out due to an energy crisis brought about by post-Fukushima nuclear crisis. This is my conclusion, and before finishing my presentation, I would like you to take note that excuse me. Yes, you can look at our magazine website written here with ID and password, and so that you can enjoy reading the articles, just like that I mentioned, and also many other articles written by non-Japanese authors. And my purpose of issuing Japan Spotlight is to prevent Japan from getting into hikikomori, social withdrawal. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Haraoka-san. I think we can have light. Yes, fiat lux, as they say in Latin. I'll take the advantage of sharing this to kind of make a short comment and ask a question.
Sure.
The comment is interesting because I think we know that a lot of ministries in Japan want to increase FDI, want to bring more foreign students, but we are essentially the only full-service foreign university in Japan. There are a few other programs that are much smaller. Now, we operate under extremely difficult conditions compared to Japanese universities. First, our students have to pay sales tax. I mean, if I go to Keio, I just pay tuition. If I go to Temple, I pay tuition plus sales tax because we are not a Japanese educational institution. And there's really, at this point, no way we could become one because the requirement for being a Japanese legal institution, which gives you non-profit status, is that you be fully Japanese. And we are the Japan campus of an American university. So it's basically as if IBM Japan were told you can work in Japan, but please no links with IBM outside of Japan. And secondly, we don't get any subsidies. Japanese universities, private universities get a considerable amount of funding from the Ministry of Education. So the impression I think that some foreign investors have, and we are a de facto foreign investor, is that there's one side of the government that's very supportive of us, but there's another side that basically would rather have all the barbarians stay locked up in Deshima, which is nice. I mean, life in Deshima was actually very pleasant. But it's not exactly what we call FDI. But the question I'd like to ask is related to what you mentioned about demography. We often hear that in order to deal with the demographic collapse and whatever happens to the fertility rate, Japan will face a severe demographic crisis because even if fertility goes up, it's going to take 25 years or 20 years until the children born this year join the labor force. Is why doesn't the government actually put more emphasis on employing women? Because 50% of the Japanese population is female. It's unlikely that 50% of the Japanese population will ever be foreign. And they are totally underutilized. I mean, anybody who is familiar here with the Japanese subsidiaries of foreign companies, I mean, the companies you've helped bring about through FDI, sees that the managerial staff is full of professional women who've been very successful. But when we go to Japanese corporations, Japanese newspapers, we really don't see many women in managerial positions. So I wonder whether you think that the government, when it looks at demography, also thinks of this side of the equation. And then I'll open it up to questions because this is a semi-democratic institution, so I don't monopolize everything.
Sure, yes. Can I?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Yes. I think DPJ government has started thinking about new policy to encourage women to get high management posts. But unfortunately, DPJ government is now in trouble. As you can see, so the policies, as I said, nobody will object, nobody will oppose. Even those policies cannot be easily passed by the parliament. That might be a problem. In the case of Europe, I guess Sarkozy, former president of France, former French president, implemented sort of the penalty on the companies which fail to employ less than 50% of female managers. That's what I've heard. And DPJ government is now thinking about similar thing. But 50. Half should be occupied by women. Half of the management. That's what I've heard.
So there will not be any more income tax because companies would pay so much. The rest of Japan would be tax-free. This would be a lot of money because they're very far from 50%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, female posts, yes. Management posts, high-class management posts. Half of the high-class management posts should be occupied by women. that's what I think EU direction, one of the EU directions, yes, fixing something, yes.
Okay, well, we'll open the floor to questions. I think I don't know if we need a mic or not. I don't think so. We're capturing it. Yeah.
Can we please go back to the second slide, giving the foreign student numbers?
Okay.
The slide, second to last.
Oh, I'll show you. Wait a second. This one?
No, the last.
The last one.
Second to last. Yes, that one.
Yes,
Okay,
sure.
That one.
Yes.
My question is not trade related or API related, but the number of students from Indonesia and India
Yes.
is not rational. I mean, it doesn't fit to me.
Really.
I mean, how come it can be so low?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand that at all.
Mhm.
Can you help me to find a reason for that? I mean, if you are getting 3.5 thousand students from Vietnam, 2.5 from Malaysia, how come you can get only 2,000 from Indonesia or only 500 from India?
Well, it's coming from Japan Student Services Organization, and I don't know why, frankly speaking. I'm going to check with this organization. Yeah.
I think
Sorry.
the reason it's often obviously for India, I mean, India is an English-speaking country when it comes to university-educated individuals, and therefore there's a tendency to go to English-speaking universities overseas. You know, if it's in Asia, it's would be Australia, Singapore, rather than Japan. I think there's a big language obstacle, and I think the other thing
the argument is against this famous size law. Supply creates its own demand. How come Japan cannot create demand for its education services from this massive population? It doesn't fit. I
Well,
mean,
it fits a labor market, I think, also, in the sense that a lot of students from India who go overseas are still thinking of working overseas afterwards. And if you're an English-speaking Indian, it's more rational to think of Australia, Singapore, the US, Canada, England, Ireland than Japan, because it takes a long time to learn Japanese.
In the case of India,
But, yeah.
I think in the case of India, this year is 60th or 70th anniversary, 60th anniversary of India-Japan foreign relations, and Indians and Japanese are now working very hard on, the governments are working very hard to increase the number of students here, Indian students here.
thank you.
Yes.
Regarding this point, many Indians thousands of Indians are studying in China. This is unfortunate, but it's true. And putting aside that discussion, my question is: recently we see that the Chinese, we are accepting Chinese investment, particularly in the field of Japanese manufacturers, such as Sharp accepted Chinese capital, and former one division of Sanyo is acquired by China. Based on your personal view, or in your view of your institution or METI's perspective, is it welcomed, or do you have some precondition, or that it's not simply welcomed? We have to do this. We have to prepare this hard work. What's your view?
First of all, I would like to clarify with you that I'm already retired from METI, so I don't know anything about, frankly speaking, METI's existing current policies. So on behalf of our foundation, it's welcome. Our foundation is NPO, always, anytime encouraging international, exchange. So that's very welcome for us. Yes.
If I can follow up on this question.
Sure.
What are the rules in most countries? I think this is what your question was leading to. In most countries, there is a vetting process on national security grounds. For example, Research in Motion in Canada may be up for sale. Probably, let's say Apple tried to buy it, there would be antitrust issues in Canada, but solely on an economic basis. I think it's pretty obvious that if a Chinese company wanted to buy it on national security grounds, it would be banned because BlackBerries are used heavily as communication tools by NATO governments, the US, Canada, Europe, and someone would say, look, it's a fine idea. Or if it were accepted, they would have to create essentially a board of directors with only Canadian or other NATO citizens, and there would be very strict regulations to essentially prevent the Chinese government from owning the manufacturer of BlackBerry, RIM. What is the process in Japan for deciding on national security grounds, not on antitrust economic grounds, but
to my knowledge, there is a special law in Japan defining national security related sectors, such as broadcasting and also electricity. Electricity, it may not be anymore, but I'm not quite sure about the electricity or some public utilities. Those belong to national security sensitive sectors. Then perhaps the participation of foreigners in managing those companies is limited.
But is there, in most of the developed countries,
Yes.
there are some fields where
Yes.
foreigners cannot
Yes,
buy,
of
but
course,
there's also a nationality-based decision. In other words, if a very high-tech German company is going to be bought by a Belgian company, it may be okay. If it's an Iranian one, someone will say, look, it's fine to have Belgian investors, but companies making centrifuges in Germany, it's really a bad idea if they're owned by Iranian investors. So is there a law in Japan that allows the government to say, we essentially say no because of who the investor is based on nationality or links to the government?
The law should be to be implemented on MFN basis, most favored nations basis. So we don't. I think it's not allowed to have a sort of discriminatory treatment. Yeah.
So that's very unique.
That's very unique. Yes.
Two unrelated questions, because I guess I don't understand this foreign direct investment quite as much as I guess you do. With aging population of a population demographics you talked about, how could FDI by itself help Japanese economy? What is the mechanism you expect? Because FDI itself would help Japanese economy with that type of demographic shift. That's number one. Number two is, I think, for example, TSMC investment in Renesas recently, or like HTC investment in Sharp. I presume it's classified as FDI, right?
Yes.
The press, as reported, is highly negative. It's Japanese industry losing its effectiveness and losing like foreigners. So when the Japanese press and general opinion seems to be seen as negative, how could foreign companies would do more of FDI when the general sentiment seems to be against it here?
The first question, if you think about India, for example, India is a country not suffering from aging yet. But the population is very young. So why don't we, accept more Indian immigration, Indian immigrants, and then perhaps we can make up for shortage of productive population due to the aging.
So you're coupling the people importing with FDI.
Yes. Yes.
That's a part of this. Okay, thanks.
Yes. Yes. And the second question is that yes, perhaps depending upon the case, the foreign companies have to think about the general climate, general sentiment of Japanese people on those sensitive sectors. But in general, it's I think in nationalistic sentiment, or I mean, how do you say, xenophobia, perhaps we can say xenophobia, should be eliminated. We don't have to be xenophobia anymore, because we cannot do, without FDI, we cannot survive, extremely speaking. That means we have to be like, Swiss people. We have to be Singaporeans, like people like Singaporeans. We have to be more open to foreigners. For example, it's not it may not be directly relevant to your points. Your points is perhaps directly related to sensitive sectors. I can understand about the sensitive sectors, but in more general, as for more general sentiment, I think, for example, when I'm an editor of Japan Spotlight, and we occasionally organize editorial meeting, and we invite some foreign writers as members of our editorial committee. So we speak with each other in English, but some Japanese participants, some Japanese members do not like that. Why do we have to speak English in the meetings organized by Japan Economic Foundation? But I think that's really, bad idea. I mean, we shouldn't take that kind of attitude. We can speak more freely in English with non-Japanese people, even though my English is very poor, but we can talk still. We can continue to talk, continue to communicate with people from the different countries. I think that attitude would change, perhaps, the level of FDI, low level of FDI in Japan.
Thank you.
Please.
Can I ask a question? First, many big companies with us, maybe last year, say, Japan is lack of labor force. That's why I say we should increase the immigrants to 10% in the near future, and probably from China or other Asian countries. So the purpose, the biggest purpose, and the reason why I say increase the immigrants is a lack of labor force. And the second question is maybe it's very related to national security, or very similar question. Where I say USA or other countries are very strict to protecting intellectual property, but we Japan not so strict. So how or Japanese companies or Japanese governments protect intellectual property? And second question is maybe there are various kinds of situations. But for example, this maybe we welcome foreign students, but are they going to stay in Japan, after graduating school or university? And what kind of position are they going to have in the near future?
In response to your second question, intellectual property rights, Japanese patent agency is working very hard, protecting intellectual property rights.
Yes.
So perhaps I guess at this moment we can say Japanese companies are protected by this institutional asset. The first question is about the lack of labor force.
Yes.
I think that in order to solve the lack of labor force, there are 2 or 3 ways. One is aged people should work longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this medical science, thanks to the medical science progress, we can work much longer, even in the 70s, very healthy. So we might be able to depend upon such, old labor force.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it will be not enough, right?
No, not good enough, perhaps.
Yeah.
So that women,
Yeah.
of course, Japanese women are underutilized.
Yeah.
So we should take more advantage of Japanese women. And we highlighted the issue of women labor force in Japan Spotlight as well. So you can refer to our magazine in our archives. And I remember one of the articles highlights comparison of competency between men and women. And women are much smarter. So Japanese women should work much harder.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So that is the second perhaps solution. And the third solution is immigration.
Okay. But it's very interesting. In France, if say, women's managerial, person are less than 50%, say, the company, say, take punishment. But if say women's percentage is 50, maybe male's percentage is less than 50. So all of the companies should be say less than 50%. Men's managerial person are less than 50%, right? It should be. It's very strange.
Yeah, I cannot tell you the exact process of French law or EU law, but I think we should, as far as Japan is concerned, we should raise the percentage of women occupying high posts in the companies and also in the governments as much as possible. It is very urgent.
No, what percent?
In the case of, in my memory, I may be wrong, much less than 10% or much less than 5%.
Really?
Yes, yes.
Oh,
it's very low.
Yeah.
It's almost as low as in the case of Korea. But Koreans would be very upset if Japan and Korea are almost same, because they will have a female president very soon, perhaps.
Really, people say Korean women are very, very strong. I mean, these are something people.
Me? Okay. Thank you for excellent presentation. Your presentation was really convincing, mostly. But my concern or my question is, my understanding that nothing is single-edged sword. So everything is a double-edged sword. Then, what are cons in the transition period before we have achieved this transformation? So history tells us in transition period, in many cases, cons precede pros, and sometimes it results in a light degree of upheavals. So my question is simply, to put simply, what is the cons, especially in transition period? This is my question for new era of the Japanese economy before we've achieved it?
That is very difficult question, but I guess in the transition, we need to take advantage of, well, very frankly speaking, the other countries' economic power. I mean, Japanese economy will perhaps be able to enjoy economic growth or wealth, perhaps only by achieving cooperation with, in particular, Asian countries, because Asian economic power, economic potential is enormous. That's why I'm very supporting TPP, for example. The other FTAs. Those are very important. FTAs would create trade, but not only trade, but also investment as well.
But
Yes.
my question is, what is cons, negative influence? Yeah,
Yes.
cons, pros and cons. Cons.
Pros and cons.
Yeah.
Yes.
Negative aspect of this transformation
This
of the
transformation.
Japanese economy.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing is a single-edged sword. So
Okay.
maybe
Yeah.
that is my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So you think as immigration grows, there will be confusion, social?
yeah, some degree of upheavals.
Mhm.
That is my expectation.
Yeah, I see. Yes. I agree with you, but nothing can be achieved
Without pain.
without
That's
pain.
right. That's
Yeah.
right. But we need to
Mhm.
be ready for
Yes, we need to
a
be
possible
ready.
negative
Yes.
aspect
Yes.
of this transformation.
We need to be ready.
Yeah, and my memory tells us the early stage of Prime Minister Thatcher.
Mhm.
Her early stage was really seemed terrible, and the UK seemed very unstable
Mhm.
to us at that time.
Mhm.
So we need to draw analogy
Mhm.
in preparation for possible upheavals
Yes.
in our future. That is my point.
Yeah, I would think so. But I still believe, even after having listened to your idea carefully, I would still say that we need Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with you on that point. Really, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation first. And it's really interesting that you think the FDI integrate algorithms to connect labor force and capital input. But the thing is, you've been explaining about the like a labor force, but you didn't really explain about the level of decreasing capital input in Japan. So how can you explain about like is there any change for the FDI in Japan like by the Japanese government, or why the level of capital input in Japan is decreasing? That would be my question.
I mean, the FDI in Japan is now decreasing.
Yeah, that's what your figure said.
Yeah. Well, I think I noted two things. One is it has started already declining in 2009, before the earthquake. After the earthquake, it's easy because foreigners non-Japanese look at the situation at Fukushima, and they thought that Japan would be a country not safe and secure anymore, and they are going to leave. They left Japan. But in 2009, it started declining, already declining. That is perhaps, in my personal experience, many, non-Japanese recognize the difficulty of Japanese market, and they gave up. They started giving up because JETRO or some other government sectors desperately try to attract FDI. But compared with such tremendous amount of efforts, the effect was so small.
So why do you think the effect is so small? Because they've been initiating a lot of policies actually. But
Yeah.
the thing is the actual amount of inward FDI is not really increasing. So, for example, I understand your explanation about the greenfield investment, but what about M&A? If the domestic companies or other companies owned by overseas companies goes out, then what about the M&A? You can explain about it, but I don't really see the linkage between your explanation and
M&A, I think Japanese companies' M&A are increasing dramatically. However, the other countries' companies' M&A are not increasing.
You mean outbound M&A?
M&A.
Outbound M&A. You mean the M&A by Japanese companies is increasing, but it doesn't mean that simply domestically, but it means that the M&A outbound.
M&A outbound.
Is increasing.
Yes,
I'm just clarifying what you're saying.
Yes, M&A outbound, yes.
When the foreigners read about Olympus, why would anybody invest here? Think about that. Why would they?
Well, then why would people invest in America? It's not convincing because Enron happened, so I think it's difficult to say that's uniquely Japanese.
There was a question in the back? Yeah.
Oh, myself?
Yeah.
Thanks. My question is, of course, we would like to attract a foreign direct investment in Japan, but I think we should have some focus on some sectors of industries. So I'd like to know if you have any idea or suggestion to the government which sectors or industries they should focus on. For example, Singapore and Hong Kong, they have focus on the financial industries, and they attracted a lot of workforce and created a lot of job opportunities for the local people. That boosted the local consumption, right, and which led to the increase in the GDP. So I want to know, is there any sector that we should focus
service sectors. I can show you the graph just a minute. The productivity increase rate. Yes. TFP rate in manufacturing as well as non-manufacturing industry. The non-manufacturing TFP rate is very low, whereas manufacturing TFP rate is relatively high. So that means we should encourage FDI in non-manufacturing sectors to raise their productivity level.
I'd like to rebut about the difference between Enron and Olympus. Enron is a pure domestic affair. What I meant about Olympus is that when they go in foreign management issues with the Japanese groupie management, and therefore when the foreign investment people look at that situation, they're just different from Enron situation.
That's true.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question in the back. If you can raise your hand.
Yes. Thank you for the presentation. You've got a lot of data here, but I don't see the data where you're going after any of the difficult developments. For example, the Japanese government wants more foreign students. They want more foreign students. They're advertising for more foreign students. Oh, they've got more foreign students. They're not focusing on what the students get when they come here. If they had attractive contents to the education,
Here.
Then why are you here?
well, I'm not in education here.
Okay, sure.
When they say they want foreign investment, they want the money to come in, they want the money to come in. What is it supposed to do? If, like Olympus, the corporate culture is very closed from the middle up, and the governance regulations, they weren't required to have a degree of transparency that would have revealed those problems earlier. If they don't change that, what about that? You say the labor force, it needs to be more heterogeneous, but children in junior high, high school, the ones who are different get weeded out, the ones who are the same go to the better schools. They had a big pat on the back this year. 80% of the graduating college students got jobs. What about the other 20%? 30% of the young people have these temporary jobs that go from month to month or year to year, and they can't plan for the future. What about the families, the young people who would like to have families, but they can't support themselves and children on the pay level? If they increase the pay, I bet you get more people coming into the labor force. If they took all of the tsukbari and said, okay, Komori, you can be quiet if you want to. We'll take some of the tsukbari and see what they would do with the mix and find some way to integrate those people. You'd have a much more interesting culture.
Yes.
Without having, if you bring in foreigners to fill those positions, you're going to get resentment. Resentment already if the qualifications for entering a big university for Japanese students are this high, but if you're a foreign student, you can get in with this level. There's already, the people in that gap are going to resent the foreign students for taking places that could have been taken by somebody with higher qualifications. So focusing on content instead of, we'd like your money.
Yeah. I agree with you, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do in my magazine, Japan Spotlight. You know, it's I'm going to try to integrate tsukbari with hikikomori, and then create a new culture in Japan Spotlight. So please have a look at our magazine, Japan Spotlight.
Sam?
One quick comment. I happen to remember, I think it's correct, that the number of women entering university is caught up with the number of men. And in 4 years, the number of women entering 4-year universities first caught up with the percentage of men entering 4-year universities in 1995. That was 15 years ago. Has the number of women surpassed and the entrance in the 4 years? The junior colleges is where the women used to go. That would be an indication of an actual change, not something that's familiar. One comment, NHK described the man that no doubt named his agricultural minister as opposed to TPP. So that does not sound good for the future of TPP. Do you know anything about women entering 4-year university?
I have no statistics, but I think it's now the number of women getting into 4-year universities is larger than the number of men.
That's right.
Yeah,
yes.
That's my guess as well.
But it's very tilted. Tokyo University is 80% male. 80. Yeah. Seoul National University is already 35% women. Keio is about 35% female. Keio Medical School is like 80% male, something like that. So yes, Temple University is 50-50. and most of the top schools in the U.S. and Europe tend to be 50-50 or close to it. So there's still an enormous gap here when you look at the most prestigious universities. And if you look at the faculty, there again it's highly skewed.
Robert, I think the U.S. was graduating more women than men.
Yeah, it is. And even at the most, actually even at the top American universities now, I think if you talk to admissions people, they'll tell you it's affirmative action for men. Yeah. I think those haven't asked questions yet, so in the back and then you can.
Thank you. Actually, I'm from India. Nice to see a lot of reference of India. I didn't know India is important thing. I wanted to say one thing from the point of view of India. What the question was, what is interesting for foreign companies about Japan? I can give some example. I'm here a long time, so time to time I help my friends coming from India to look for business partners. One of the typical interest is R&D. Why Japanese side, you are not providing Japanese R&D capability as a facility where places like Indian companies could come and use that to improve their products. I think there's a huge demand for that. There are some thoughts I had brainstormed with my friend. One is that you could have a R&D kind of a center where local companies could help, say, a company from India or Indonesia to improve their product and maybe share some IP. And the Indian company can go back to their country and make business with it and give a part of the royalty to the company. I'm sure it's a FDI or not, but I saw there's a huge opportunity.
Yes. But in the case of India-Japan collaboration, cultural misunderstanding does seem to be playing still, unfortunately, big role.
Exactly.
Yeah, and Indians prefer, fast and quick decision, whereas the Japanese always prefer, long time, consensus making decision process.
So in 20 years, so you know a little bit about it. I think that's a very important one. That's where probably JETRO or other government could help. I can give a specific example where one of my friends bought a delegation with the help of a FICCI, which is the Indian Chamber of Commerce equivalent, to on the agriculture area, because India needs a lot of agricultural machinery of small scale, which is Japan is specialized for that. So they wanted a group of manufacturer of agricultural machinery in Japan to work with the local manufacturer to say if they can come up find a joint venture or not to improve the design products for India. And I think they're going back with a lot of interest, but not much response. And I thought it's very strange because the agricultural industry of India would be a huge industry, and there was not enough interest from the Japanese side to do something special.
I think it's largely due to cultural problem. I've heard from my friends working on IT companies that their preferred partners are always Chinese and Koreans.
Right.
Yeah. Even though many Chinese and Koreans do not like Japanese, but they still partner.
Thank you. You have a question?
What you're telling reminds me very much of European situations where some countries like Germany have very similar problems. They have also an aging society, and they have very strict laws to let people in. Basically, in most European countries, you can only come in if you're, let's say, some construction worker. I personally, as a European person, I've always found Japanese immigration laws and many other aspects in Japan much more relaxing than where I'm from. But my question is, first of all, I was wondering.
I think that microphone's kind of broken.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so I think it's better that you shout.
What I'm asking is, when we talk about Japan, everyone is just bashing Japan for what's going wrong. Is there any positive development as well? I mean, there's many other countries where we have very similar situations, and they wouldn't, first of all, talk about it so negatively themselves, first of all. Secondly, trust me, corruption-wise, my country beats Japan easily, yeah? And there's not so many people talking about it, that's just a way of life. But the idea is, I'm just always stunned how negative everything is perceived and how negatively people talk about it, might there not be, let's say, a more positive way or more constructive way of dealing with this issue? Because there is a certain negativeness which I can understand, the data isn't good, but maybe it's a better idea to go about this a little bit more positively than just constantly bashing oneself, which I find after a while a little bit irritating. Because European countries have similar problems, and it's not as negatively perceived in Europe as it is here. Even now, the situation is somehow, yeah.
With my presentation, I'm highlighting positive points of
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, because it's very easy to enrich Japanese. Because if you change slightly, you can increase FDI, and if you change slightly, you can increase women labor force. In the case of Europe, in the case of the United States, it's already exhausted. FDI is already there, and women already work. But in Japan, two important things are not fully utilized. That means we have enormous amount of growth potential.
And also, I guess we're just discussing one subject. If you look at the exchange rate of Japan, I mean, that representation of confidence in Japanese economy, and that's never been higher. That's after the nuclear disaster, where typical other countries would have the riots. Not a single riots. And so that the yen represents positiveness of the economy. So we can discuss that part.
Thank you.
This time the question directly refers to foreign direct investment. I don't see any reason for Japanese entrepreneurs, corporate or individual entrepreneurs, to allow foreign competition for investment in this country. And the reason is very easy actually. Bank of Japan is providing almost unlimited access to credit, direct credit from the Bank of Japan for any entrepreneurial intention to support growth in this country. So local companies and Japanese citizens, if they have any small idea that can support growth in this country, can have direct credit from Bank of Japan, which is almost the cheapest funding on earth. And I don't see any power of foreign companies trying to get a, I don't know, some sort of profit-generating field that they can invest in Japan, other than unique cases such as Sharp, which is failing to restructure fast, or maybe Japanese entrepreneurs is not interested in that field anymore. Which means anybody coming to Japan is coming to lose money. So, I mean, isn't this a consistent story about Japan?
Disney, McDonald's, Starbucks, lots of companies make money. Yeah, they're making money. McDonald's, Starbucks.
McDonald's is a joint venture, right?
Yes.
It's a joint venture.
McDonald's.
Yeah.
It's a licensee.
McDonald's Japan, I mean.
It's a licensee of McDonald's US.
Okay.
Starbucks is Starbucks Japan has Japanese investors as well, because it's traded on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, I think.
Okay, your examples can bring the number to 3% of GNP, right? Congratulations for that. But it is not convincing. It is not destroying this basic idea that Bank of Japan is providing almost unlimited access to credit, and foreigners cannot compete with this funding advantage.
But foreign companies can raise the fund using from Japanese banks.
Yeah.
But still, they cannot generate the high equity return. That's why it's not.
Okay, I think I have to push harder than. The Japanese companies have access to JV credits of $100 billion from national reserves. If you are finding a profitable investment opportunity anywhere in the world, and if you are a Japanese company, you can have access to JV credits for opportunistic mergers and acquisitions anywhere in the world. So Japanese companies are supported from the international perspective, and they have this local competitive advantage as well. So I see no chance for foreign competitors other than Disneyland or other examples that you can bring the number to 3%. So
I'm going to check with my friends in METI, and then I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to send you.
No, I didn't mean that serious, sir.
Because I'm not familiar with the national system.
Any other questions? Yeah, you did ask a question, so you can. Yeah.
You first. My first. Okay. Just two quick questions. The first is, during your talk you mentioned, thank you by the way for the interesting talk, that there had been momentum towards a law for promotion of FDI in Japan, and you mentioned that they'd run into some trouble. And is that because of a partisan dispute, or because within the DPJ there's not enough, I guess, priority, and it's only a limited power, and it's going to promote, or I should say, work for other things like the consumption tax increase,
tax, yes.
right? And so that there's not much momentum right now, but that there could be in the future.
Yeah, could be in the future. Yeah.
Okay.
In the near future, I hope. Yeah, that will be fast.
And yet, do you think there would be bipartisan support for that?
Bipartisan, yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then secondly, and you only mentioned it during one of your responses to another questioner, that the importance of the TPP for increasing FDI in Japan. And I'm wondering, when I heard your talk and you didn't mention the TPP or any other free trade agreements, is that sort of representative of the fact that these FTAs aren't thought of as increasing the potential for FDI? Is that they're more looked at as a chance for increasing of exports, and then again, increasing the import or import of cheaper products for consumers here, and that people don't appreciate the importance for FDI?
As for TPP, I think the main objection is coming from agriculture. Our agriculture is protected, and people engaged in agriculture do not like the idea of the increase of imports of agriculture products due to free trade, including TPP. But my idea is that we can modify negative impact of trade liberalization by another policy to strengthen competitiveness of Japanese agriculture, because Japanese cuisine is so popular all over the world. It's considered almost similar to French cuisine. So that means we can export agriculture products as much as possible. So with subsidy program or something like that, we can strengthen the competitiveness of Japanese agriculture, even Japanese rice farmers, and then encourage them to export. And that will be perhaps beneficial for the agriculture itself, because the Japanese society is aging, but in particular agriculture is aging. And the average age of agriculture workers, agriculture farmers, is 70, well, almost 70 or something like that. So I think with this we cannot compete with the other countries' agriculture, even without TPP or any other FTA. So I guess by encouraging exporting capacity of agriculture sector, we can also attract young people to agriculture.
Yes.
Yeah, coming back to the topic of high-skilled workers, it is simply because our culture of being homogeneous or xenophobia, or rather, isn't it the matter of regulation? For example, look at nurse or elderly care helper. We have intern from Indonesia. We welcome, and the consumer welcome them. We are happy to have their services. However, because of the regulation, they cannot, the Ministry of Health make exam, and they cannot pass the exam. That's why they have to come back to their home countries. That's caused by regulation. Then, can we simply say that it's cultural issue rather than it's a regulational issue?
It's a good question. I guess it's a regulational issue, regulatory issue. And I think you were talking about Japanese exam, you know, to be qualified for a nurse. And I think it's ridiculous, to be frank with you, to have such difficult exam in Japanese. So perhaps we can, we can organize English exam to, allow Philippine nurses to work for Japanese hospitals. I think that will be, the maximum, utilization of the benefits of FTA, trade liberalization.
So who's wrong?
Let me ask a follow-up question about the nurses, because I think the thing is, okay, let's say we have Philippine nurses who take the exam in English. Japanese doctors do not speak English.
Yeah.
So as a patient, and I mean I'm very much in favor of immigration and everything, but as a patient, do I want my nurse to speak a language that my doctor doesn't understand and to have problem reading? See, if this were in Sweden, if I have a Philippine nurse who's English speaking, it's not a problem. All Swedish doctors are fluent in English. If they even have to write instructions in English, they'll do it. But Japanese doctors cannot write in English, and they cannot speak English, and they can't understand it. So what type of medical care am I going to get? And like when the doctor says in Japanese, he needs some cortisone, is she going to understand he needs some cyanide? So I've always had this question about the exam for nurses. Doesn't it make sense for them to be tested like Japanese nurses? And shouldn't we look for foreign workers in many other areas where it's not an issue?
I think in defense, I think what he's talking about is written type of, because I read about it. It's not spoken. So they're capable of a verbal communication, but they cannot write.
The doctor writes when they have the instructions on how to use the X-ray machine that's in Japanese, or when they have the medical document in Japanese. It doesn't have furigana. It doesn't have English.
These people don't have that. These are they move the patient.
Well, nurses.
Some hospitals accept only. For example, let's say, if some hospitals accept only foreign patients, it's okay.
Yeah.
And let's say, those nurses should work at those hospitals. Yeah. Maybe let's say, I don't know actually, but Kameda Hospital, which is located at Chiba. You mean many foreign people take, for example, health checkup at Kameda or some medical institute, and those nurses should work those hospitals, or Chinese nurse who can only speak Chinese should work those hospitals.
We're talking about two things. I'm talking about nurses aid.
Okay,
that's different. Nurses aid was being rejected for not being able to write proper Japanese. That one I think we're discussing, but not the nurses part.
If they improve the working conditions of the nurses, they would get more of the nurses who have studied, passed the exam in Japan, and retired from the nursing profession because the job was simply not sustainable.
Yeah, there was actually a long article in Toyo Keizai saying that apparently being a nurse here is not particularly attractive.
No, improve the contents, and you don't have a problem supplying more.
So I think we've reached our witching hour. Thank you so much, Tara Kazan.